treasurers today have widened their roles. They are taking on a lot more responsibility that historically they've never had to perhaps take on. For example, procurement or supply chain financing or some of these other departments where investor relations is another good example. One of the slides I've come across from a professional body in the UK called the Association of Corporate Treasurers lists up to 23 different areas that a treasurer could be responsible for. So it kind of demonstrates that we're living in times when not only technology is having a huge impact on treasury, but the role of a treasurer is evolving, kind of exponentially.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spoke with somebody at breakfast this morning who had commented that she was in treasury, but that was half of her responsibility. The other was sustainability.
Yes. That's another good area you mentioned, sustainability. So from a treasurer's perspective, sustainability is not necessarily the most like the top of their list. Clearly, they're looking after risk and liquidity. But what I'm seeing is that regulation, globally and in the UK, is driving treasurers to be more, shall we say, aware. And there is an incentive now in terms of sustainability because there are certain laws that are being put in by the government. For example, a green bond has been raised by our UK government, so allowing companies to effectively offset their carbon footprint in terms of their green assets against the green liabilities. So there's an actual incentive now for treasurers to look at sustainability. And in a kind of sort of similar vein, you could say, if you look at cloud-based solutions, and a lot of companies are now looking to implement cloud-based solutions, you are actually improving, sort of your carbon footprint because you're not using hardware, using less energy, potentially less paper. So all of that beginning to, I think, have an impact in terms of sustainability for companies.
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking somewhat also about that it's not just a change in finances, it's kind of a cultural change.
Yes, yeah, that's a very good point. So what I've done in terms of when I present to corporate treasurers is try to describe the different areas that are impacted by, in terms of technology, but also in terms of the world we live in. So, you've got in terms of, and I'm going to have to refer to some of my slides here. So with cultures in itself, you've got government regulation. So we have the GDPR regulation around data security. It's very important. It's become a big issue, and certainly as treasurers, we're all very concerned and are kind of obliged to make sure that we are keeping our systems secure. In the UK, we have something called PSD2, which is the Payment Service Directive, which will now open the doors for a lot of banks to allow fintechs to come and disrupt their business, or at least to work with them on providing other products. And then you've got the sustainability point about regulation. From a corporate perspective, you've got financial regulation, so IFRS, GAAP, and also cybercrime. So these are areas which have begun to influence and affect the way companies operate. So you think about treasury historically, even 5 years ago, people weren't particularly engaged on cybercrime, but we are now putting that as a potentially top 5 priority in our companies because it's a very important area. This is where, again, I think in terms of the cloud, there's a myth, I believe, that treasurers have about how secure cloud is. I think one way I would demonstrate that the cloud is very secure is if you look at companies like Amazon or Google or any of the big providers, they're all cloud-based solutions, and they invest a lot of money in the security around their products. So I would feel that any cloud-based solution, or most cloud-based solutions, once you've done your due diligence, would offer that same level of, I think, security.
We all know in Treasury, everyone uses spreadsheets all the time.
Ah, yes.
Do you see those spreadsheets going away with the changes?
Not at all, actually. I think, for me, the whole issue about spreadsheets is it's almost you have to define what you're looking to use them for. Where I would say spreadsheets are kind of not perhaps the most efficient is if they replace your treasury management system. Because for me, treasury management systems actually future-proof your function for a number of reasons. You've got the regulation, you've got the security, you've got the sort of human error aspect, all of that good stuff. And frankly, today, to be able to invest in a TMS solution, you're not looking at spending a huge amount of money. But I wouldn't suggest that spreadsheets are dead, because spreadsheets are still a tool. And I think they have their place in terms of sort of whatever functions that or reports that you might want to use them for. but I wouldn't rely on them as being your focal or your main kind of database.
So looking into the future, what do you see is going to happen with the architecture and networks as we move forward?
Right, so you've probably heard the term blockchain used a few times. My personal view is that blockchain will disrupt and will be used quite extensively in treasury. Now, I don't expect treasurers to be pioneers of blockchain or in fact the main developers of blockchain. That's really to the experts, so the fintechs, the banks potentially, but I do believe that the solutions that they offer will very much engage blockchain technology. And you know, it's not something that's still being developed, it's actually being used as we speak. So there are about probably 8 or 9 industries that are already using blockchain in today's world. You know, you could look at agriculture products, you can look at diamonds. Diamonds are being registered using blockchain. And in music, royalties are there's an artist that's using blockchain to distribute her royalties. So there's lots of advantages and sort of benefits from blockchain in my view. And obviously the whole KYC piece, you know, big data, blockchain really lends itself to that. As a treasurer, the number one let's say issue or priority for most surveys is cash flow forecasting. And what I think, or I'd like to see, is whether it's blockchain or some other solution, but I think blockchain could be the answer here, is the ability for companies to track a transaction from the point it actually becomes, it becomes transparent to the business. So often what happens is we're a decentralized business. So we're very reliant to some degree on our businesses reporting that information through the systems we currently have. In this particular scenario, I think it'd be almost ideal to have a solution that, like the blockchain, kind of like tracking products, agricultural products, tracking this transaction all the way through to where you actually hedge that exposure. Obviously, you'd be able to hedge it a lot earlier if you're aware of it sooner. The other area, I think, in terms of banks, tools like APIs, so that's application programming interface, and that's allowing basically the fintechs to come into that, into those areas to be able to offer some of the solutions they're offering. So again, not just disrupt the banks, but I think to partner with banks to improve their solutions that they're currently offering. And that's quite good to see happening. So I think certainly in 2 to 5 years' time, I see a lot of the systems that we're currently using, whether with the banking solutions or fintech solutions, using blockchain technology, using APIs, and the aim of the game in terms of treasury has always been, in my view, visibility, connectivity, security, and efficiencies, reducing your costs. As long as those 4 criteria are met, I think this is kind of the way that corporate treasurers are looking to go.
Undoubtedly, there's been a lot of changes in technology that have been happening very rapidly. I mean, even the risk visualization that a lot of the systems are getting now, which was never available in the past. Do you view this as, you talked about disruption.
Yes.
Do you view this as like another industrial revolution?
Absolutely. I believe it's been coined the phrase that we're in the 4th industrial revolution, which is really the digital revolution. I think what's significant about this revolution is the pace at which that change is taking place. So I'm going to throw a few statistics out there because this will help, I think, to demonstrate the pace and also the scope of how wide the disruption will be. So obviously, statistics, I think at the beginning of this year, suggested that the world's population is 7.5 billion. 3.7 billion people at that time were using the internet. So if you take that into account for anything that you potentially want to do, you could, in theory, reach to that number of people. So I think that's one aspect. I think the other aspect is in terms of mobile technology and the way that the world's developing and progressing. So the Chinese have already developed what we call quantum internet. And what that will do, I believe, is offer a greater level of security, which obviously will take care of things like payments and data. But they're saying it's not going to be available for a few years. But I believe it will be much sooner than the time frame they've suggested. All of this lends itself to the fact that there's there's another area called Internet of Things. So if you've heard of the Amazon Echo, or if you have a sat nav or any sort of wireless device, that's part of the Internet of Things. By the year 2020, there's going to be 50 billion Internet of Things. Well, what that says to me is that data is going to be the most kind of valuable commodity, because all of this information that's being gleaned by these devices is going to be, and it's currently being used, if you look at Spotify, Netflix, and some of these other websites, Facebook for example, to identify and define what consumers are looking for. I think from a treasurer's perspective, we can use these tools, we can use that technology to help us add value to our companies, identify where those forecasts are, identify what the needs of the business are, and begin to solve those. Key at the end of the day, speed and accuracy. If you can do that in a more cost-effective way, you're future-proof for your treasury function.
I'm not sure I understand the difference between quantum internet and internet.
Okay, so quantum internet is a good question. Quantum internet basically is two streams of flows, is the simplistic way of describing it. And what it's doing is, typically with your normal internet, you've got one flow going through with a message. Quantum has two flows, one with a message and one with an encryption code. But you can't identify which has the encryption code. So if you were to try and hack the message, it disintegrates because you need the encryption code. And that's why it's so secure. They call it unhackable internet.
Okay, well that would be a great boon.
Absolutely.
In terms of payments, particularly on the internet. So, well, I appreciate your coming and talking to us. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
No, I think it's been an interesting discussion. I think it's always useful to have this kind of debate, if you like, because I think for me it's about increasing awareness. So if you say there's anything I'd like to add, there's probably one other thing I'll say in terms of the future. So I think historically Treasury's been an area that most treasurers have been very, let's say, reluctant, for good reason, to discuss openly. And when I say openly, I'm referring to typically processes, or even if you've been a victim of cybercrime, for example, that sort of thing. But I believe that as we go forward, there's an element, there's a degree of transparency that's permeating the treasury world, within reason, because you still have to keep certain things confidential. But what that means to me is that companies are beginning to be more open about looking and sharing with other companies what they're doing, because they recognise, I think, there's something to gain from collaborating. The banks are beginning to do it as well, which is very interesting. So banks are collaborating with each other, not in terms of cybercrime, because they see there's an obvious benefit there for them, but in some of the other kind of, if you look at some of the cryptocurrencies, they've done, Ripple is a good example, R3. So there's I think that there's and today's generation as well, frankly, are looking to be more collaborative. If you look at Uber, taxi sharing, I mean, I know these are very small examples, but I think the world is going to going in that direction, because there's also that whole element of sustainability. People are more conscious about their, sort of limited resources and want to make better use of them.
Well, thank you, Royston. I appreciate your coming and talking to us on this. It's an interesting topic.